Okay, so we are in the chapter How It Works, chapter 5, and we're welcoming back David GL. We had Paige sit in with me last week, and that was so much fun, but we're glad to have David back. And we left off on 59, second paragraph. Basically, we left off with here are the steps we took, which are suggested as a program recovery. So we're just going to pick up right here where the text continues, where we have the 12 steps in their short form. And what we thought we'd do is read them, and then David is going to share where each of these steps can be found in the big book. And he's actually going to share that from a resource from this speaker we love, a guy named Herb K. And I will post a link at some point in the meeting here to where you can get this same summary document that's got this breakdown of where each step is in the book. I think you'll appreciate it. So David, why don't you jump on in here, and we'll go step one, and then you can chime in, and we'll just ping pong back and forth.
Okay.
Okay, so step one is we admitted we were, and we're not going to deep dive into all the steps, guys, because obviously we've been talking a whole bunch, right? To this point, the last 60-ish, 70-ish pages about step one and step two, and then we're going to get into three. In this study, we're getting into the steps in depth, so we're not going to get into the steps here. We're just going to, whip through them and let you know where you can find them in the book, and then we'll get to them in the coming weeks. So step one, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable.
Okay, guys. So hopefully you got a study book, a book that you can have a blank page on. If not, like David said, he'll try to post it before the meeting's over so you can have this guide. But if we want to find step one in the big book as it relates, first of all, it's going to be threefold, just like our illness is. So the first fold of the illness is of the body. So the whole doctor's opinion. So from XXV, so 25, all the way to XXII 32. That's the whole doctor's opinion, referencing what happens to us once we put drink or drug in our body, that we have this abnormal reaction, we break out in craving. Along with that, as it relates to the body, also in Bill's story, pages 1 through 8, it's another part of the body, step one. And then, of course, page 17 through 23 in our book. So we're also going to be talking, there's a solution chapter 2 as it relates to the body. That's step one. So now as it relates to the mind, would be pages 23 through 43. That'll be related to the mind in our big book. Then as it relates to our will, it'll be pages 44 and 45. Page 52, the bedevilments, and then page 60 through 62. So that will cover almost 2/3 of our book is going to be related to the first step. So because the steps end on page 103. So this is when it relates to step one, when I talked about the body, the mind, and the will. And as I outline what they are, so David hopefully will post that and make it a little bit easier than you trying to take dictation. Oh, good. Thank you.
Yeah. If you look in the chat, guys, I put the link in, it's page 70. And I guess I could show this while you're taking us through it too. I mean, I think you should talk to it, but let me share it at the same time, David.
The one other thing I want to talk about, though, too, is when we're talking about powerlessness here in this first step, the word powerless would not be used again in the next under the rest of the book. It just doesn't be used. The word power is used 40 more times in the big book. But we're not going to be talking about powerlessness anymore after page 59. We're going to be talking about power. So there's the outline for you guys. It's a great outline. We love it. We love listening to Herb K. If you've never had an opportunity to listen to him, such detail, such a scholar, such an opportunity to learn more and more about the book.
We always say he's like Joe and Charlie are like the grade school, right? They got to dumb it down for us stubborn, hard-headed people to give us the real basics. And then you get to high school level, right? Where it's maybe, like the Ramers or something like that. Then we get to college level, your Joe Hawks, your Mark Houstons. Then Herb is like the PhD. It's very academic approach, but it's very brilliant. He'll take you through the steps. He's got a step series. starts on step 12 and works his way backwards. And it makes the most sense. Like you'd think, what? How can you do that? But how he lays it out. He actually starts with the spiritual experience first, the appendix. Then he gets into 12 and moves all the way back and finishes with 1. He's a brilliant speaker. Brilliant speaker. So step 2, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. And I'm sorry, David, just before you jump in, just so you guys are clear what you're looking at here, this first column here that says Big Book AA, those are the references that David's covering. These other 2 columns are actually books that Herb wrote as sort of companion guides to AA. We're not endorsing them. I've never read either of them, but I bet they're pretty damn good because Herb is pretty damn good. Right. So, but Agreed. We're talking about what's in this first column here, where it says Big Book AA. Sorry, go ahead. Step 2, David.
Okay, so as the illustration speaks to us there, step 2 is on pages 45 through 57. And then again in Bill's story on pages 9 through 16. And then later in the book, after the 164 in the spiritual appendix, 567 and 568, all related to step 2, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves can restore us to sanity.
3, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him.
So pages 58 through 63, where the third step prayer is going to be in the second paragraph. That is the third step in our book.
4, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves.
So it's going to be in the resentment. So you're going to find step 4. You will find it on page 64, as well as column 1. You'll find on 64 in our big book in the illustration. You also find column 2 on page 64, and you'll find column 3 on page 64 and 65. And then you'll find a prayer on page 66 and 67. You'll find your fear inventories on page 67 through 68. Your personal relations or your sex relations on page 68 through 70. And the conclusion to step 4 is on pages 70 through 71.
Step 5, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs.
Pages 72 through 75, where we'll see the amazing 5th step promises.
And then want everyone to really pay attention to something here out of the big book. All right, we got steps 6, 7, and 8. So we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character, humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings, made a list of all persons we had harmed, and became willing to make amends to them all. What do all 3 of these steps have in common?
They're on page 76, for crying out loud.
Basically, you got kind of 2 or 3 paragraphs on 6 and 7, and then you got half a paragraph really on 8. Just don't overthink this. Don't overthink, especially with a newcomer. Get them into the work. Get them through the work. I probably talked about this last week or the week before. I remember talking about it recently. When the newcomer is done with that first 5th step, direction in the book says, go home, spend an hour, make sure they can say to themselves that they did all the work in the first 5 thoroughly and honestly. And then it says, if we can say to the satisfaction, boom, you do 6, get through that, boom, you do 7. And then what? Now we need action and more action. Boom, you're right into 8. First time through, we got to hustle. It's 3 paragraphs here. Get through the steps, get to God, and go back and go word by word. Then get into the 12 and 12. Go on your spiritual journey, right? Do that with your sponsees. It's 3 paragraphs and 3 steps here, guys.
And to David's point, so that's the directions in the book. To sit quietly, go home, and have a quiet time with yourself. Look over the 5 proposals that you just did. And then immediately we go to 6. And those are God steps. 6 and 7 are God steps. I already have an 8-step list on 8. So that's why there's not a lot of detail probably in the big book necessarily, because God's either going to remove my defects of character or he's not. It's just that simple. I don't have the power to do them, and I don't know the difference between my liabilities and my assets anyhow. But the 8th step is you making a list. Well, I've got a list, and I can add to that list of all the people I've harmed. And then the part that I'm going to pray about is to become willing to make amends, complete amends to, and the key word in that sentence is the last thing, all. Make all my amends. But because power is flowing in, and because on page 76, the writing in the big book changes drastically from powerlessness to power flowing in on the top of page 76. And when we get there, we'll point that out and see how power is totally flowing in here, because that is a God step 6 and 7. And I'm going to need his power. I'm going to have access to it so I can go out and make these amends to all the people I've harmed.
Step 9, made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others.
Pages 76 through 84, where we will find the 9th step promises, which we hang proudly on the walls of most AA groups. Call them what you want, or they're observations, but they will come true before you're halfway through.
Step 10, continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it.
One of my favorite steps in the whole wide world to talk about is the disciplines of 10, 11, and 12. And they outline it so easily, so simply for me, because I'm in a recovered state of mind and body by this time. I had the obsession removed, the maladies been removed from me, anyways, in my case. And you'll find that on pages 84 and 85. You'll find the disciplines on page 84 of our big book. And there'll be words that I have to look for in there. Those are spiritual disciplines. The words like watch, ask, discuss, amend, turn. Those are things that I'm always going to be paying attention to throughout my day, because when it comes to step 10, it means the clock never runs out on 10. So we can find that on page 84. And then the great promises on 85, which I think we don't talk about enough in our meetings. We need to talk more about those 10-step promises, because they are absolutely amazing.
Step 11, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood him, praying only for knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out.
Page 85 through 88. So here we are, another inventory we're going to take. So we take the 4th step, the mother of all inventories. We're going to take a 10-step inventory, a spot check inventory throughout our day. That's where I live all day long. And then at night, I have this evening review. And in the morning, upon awakening. If I'm not doing this stuff, then I'm not living the way of life that this book will promise me if I will get. So we can find those directions on page 85 through 88.
Step 12, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs.
So as we've had the spiritual awakening, and this chapter is chapter 7. So this is the chapter of working with others. And in that chapter, we'll find that from page 89 through 103. 103 is, again, I mentioned it earlier, is where the steps, the directions for the steps ends in the big book. But it doesn't mean that, well, as I go on here and talk about this, you'll find out where I'm going to practice these principles on my affairs, because actually on page 89 through 103, they're really just teaching us how to work with others here. They're not talking and how to carry this message. Having had a spiritual awakening, that is the result of these steps. It happens for all of us if we do this work. That is the blessing of the whole thing. But the charge is that I have to carry this message, and the third part of it is going to be in the next remaining chapters, practicing these principles in all my affairs. That's the challenge.
Okay, so I guess last point I just want to make about this is there is no need in this day and age of the internet and Zoom to not find all the resources we need to aid ourselves in comprehension of the literature and doing the work. I mean, we've got fantastic teachers like Herb that not only explains this stuff well, but this is a 71-page document for how he takes people through the steps. Avail yourself of these resources, as David and I have, in a much, much, much less significant extent. This is the little site we have for our group here. Purpose of this book And even here, we've got, I mentioned this before, we've got a summary here in a PDF. It's sort of even faster than Herb's list there. It's, I call them almost like the greatest hits of each step and how to take somebody through all 12 steps in 12 hours, right? And we've got it laid out here in a little PDF. And again, I'm not saying it's the right way. I don't think it's the wrong way. It's just a way that David and I did from our study. So we've got all the books, all the pages from the book, and we've got links to us talking about them too, right? So you can check that out on purposethisbook.com. All right, Abby, any key words you want to bring up from those 12 steps?
Yes, the only one I really have is meditation, and that is to reflect upon and contemplation. But
Okay.
other than that,
awesome.
Let me finish up though too, David, if you don't mind. So
yeah, no,
because so chapter 8 is, this is what we're talking about here is to practice these principles in all our affairs. How are we going to know how to do that? Well, if you really study this book in depth, we will find out actually on page 111 of Two Wives. When we get to that part, we'll point out these things. How do we practice these principles in all our affairs? So according to the chart that David put up there, chapter 8, Two Wives, is about principles and relationships. So that's going to be page 104 through 121. And then chapter 9 is the family afterwards. So we'll find out how to practice these principles in our lives with our family. So a lot of times when we look at the chapter to wives, everybody kind of goes, oh, chapter to wives. If I look at it in a different form, different than I ever looked at before, like these are my directions for me to practice these principles in all my affairs. So one of them is on page 111, just off the top of my head, I believe it says, we should not anger easily. So that is a principle that I have to apply in my life. When we're talking about the family afterwards, we'll find that in pages 122 through 135. Again, where we practice these principles, the 3 hardest places: to wives, family afterwards, to the employers. So we'll find out at work how to do that, how to practice these principles on page 136 through 150. And then the last one is chapter 11, where to apply a vision for you. How do I practice these principles in my fellowship, in my community, in every aspect of my life? See, this doesn't stop at the meetings, that 1 hour group that we're sitting in. This is how I live my life today. And you'll find that on pages 151 through 164. So that's Herb K's breakdown. David and I love it. So it's just a great sheet for me to use. I use it with my sponsees all the time, and I pass it on to them.
Hey, Abby, when you have a moment, we had a request for the definition of the word recovery from the old dictionary. Thank you. Okay. Let's keep going. Let's keep on trucking here. Top of 60. Many of us exclaimed, "What an order!" I can't go through with it. Do not be discouraged. No one among us has been able to maintain anything like perfect adherence to these principles. We are not saints. The point is that we are willing to grow along spiritual lines. The principles we have set down are guides to progress. We claim spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. Abby,
I do have the definition for spiritual, which is of or belonging to a man's spirit or soul, not bodily or material. So in this sentence, the point is that we are willing to grow along no. We are willing to grow along spirit or soul lines. The best I got.
Okay, right on. Go ahead, David.
So in Bill's writing, so it starts out as many of us exclaim. So first, the original said, "You may exclaim," and I love a guy who I met. He passed on sober. He used to read it like this: "Many of us exclaim, what, an order?" with a question mark. I love that. Stick around long enough, man. Guys will come up with clever stuff. I hear it and I go, oh, I love that. I can't go through with it. Do not be discouraged. No one among us has been able to maintain anything like perfect adherence to these steps. We are not saints. Let not that be an excuse for not doing the work, though, please. The point is, and sometimes people in the meeting goes, what's the point? I don't particularly care for that, but they do.
No chanting,
And
no chanting.
no chanting, stop the chanting. Is it willing to grow along what? Spiritual lines. These are also the steps. The disciplines of 10, 11, and 12. The principles, again, the steps. We have set down our guides to progress. So I'm going to continue understanding and effectiveness. We'll get into that when we get into later steps in the book. We claim spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. So Bill and Abby and Bob, they didn't have the steps before Bill wrote this thing. They had the 4 absolutes, which were purity, unselfishness, honesty, and love. And that's what they practiced.
So, let's just, as I often suggest, let's look at what Bill wrote here. Okay. And let's also read this with the context of maybe our personal experiences. So, coming in, if you're anything like me, I took a look at all those things on the wall and I was like, no effing way, right? What an order. I'm not going to do this stuff, right? God, what? Amends, what? You got to be crazy. So Bill is recognizing this is an order of some magnitude that we are presenting to a newcomer, and he's basically saying, like, chill, don't be discouraged, just everybody relax, right? And we're not perfectionists. We're not supposed to turn into robots or automatons, or even on the opposite end of the spectrum, these perfect, like, ascetic monks wandering into forest for the rest of our life. We're not saints. We're going to continue to be human beings who are going to be fallible, who are going to make mistakes, right? The point of the whole exercise, the whole way of life of this design for living is that we're going to continue to grow along spiritual lines. And, we were talking, David was talking about how much he loves the 10th step. And the 10th step very much talks about this, right? Our next function beyond, as we're starting to figure out how to be a maximum service to God and the people about us in 9, we're going to grow in understanding and effectiveness 10, right? Which is going to continue for our lifetime. We want to keep growing along spiritual lines. And these principles we have set down are guides to progress, or perhaps it could be said, the principles we have set down are guides to progress. Okay? Either way, let's think about 2 words, same spelling, slightly different meanings in the context. But most importantly, we claim spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. I love how people in the fellowships take an expression or idea from the book and butcher it and then wield it like a child who grabbed a knife off the counter and is waving it around. How many times have you heard somebody in a meeting be like, yeah, so my boss is the biggest asshole, and man, I gave him a what to, but then the next day I went and apologized. It's progress, not perfection. Like, no. That's not the point of this phrase here. This is not to be trotted out so that I can publicly try to excuse every time I don't fall off the beam, every time I willfully and intentionally take a header off it. That is not the point of what this sentence is saying. The point of this sentence is that we are on a mission of growth. We're on a continuous mission of self-improvement. I shouldn't even say really self-improvement, really God improvement through our relationship with God as our higher power. It's not about becoming this exceptional being. It's about continuing to push myself to get better and to rely on that relationship with God. Do not yield these phrases like the child having a tantrum, right? Or to excuse behavior. That's not the purpose of the text or any part of it.
Yeah, I love what David uses as example quite often, because when the paragraph starts out, it says, many of us display in one order, I can't go through with it. This is not a buffet. It's not pick and choose, like sitting there and going, steps on the wall. And I could do one. I just admit that my innermost self, or you don't even know how to say innermost self, but I'm powerless. I get it, but I don't understand what unmanageability is. Maybe I'll do 9. I'll just run out and make, apologies to everybody. So the minimum freedom I'm going to get is from addiction. The maximum freedom I can get is from my unmanageability. That's what I'm looking for here. And if I do these steps honestly and thoroughly, that is the result that we all get. We all get that, all of it. But this is, like I said, the clock doesn't stop on 10. It always runs constantly. And this is our way of living. I try to my best ability to live this way all day long. So I would never say today, one in order, I can't go through with it. I've gone through with it. How do I stay motivated? That's what step 12 is all about giving up myself, being useful, practicing these principles on my affairs, carrying the message to the suffering alcoholic, one-on-one across the table from those people. That way I feel the presence of God in my life. And then we're willing to grow along spiritual lines. I feel the presence of God when I'm sitting across from a guy or a gal that I'm working with one-on-one. I feel, because when 1 or 2 or more of us are gathered together, he is present for me. Those absolutes that Bill talked about, they looked really similar to the opposite of the bedevilments. Usefulness. Man, I never felt useful until I got sober and practiced these principles in all my affairs. Honesty. I live my life pretty darn honest today. And love of other people today. I learned how to love God, others, and myself. When we get into later into the steps in the 10, it's going to talk about taking a personal inventory. That personal inventory that we're talking about is all about me having a relationship with myself, with God, and with others. And and at the bottom of the page of the directions on step 10 is practicing the loving and tolerance that I've been given today. And then purity, like trying to be as open and honest as I can possibly be all day long with everybody. So that means a pause is going to come in. They give me all kinds of things I can use in my life to be a better human being. I don't like that excuse of we're not saints, because a lot of people think that's an outlet, or that's a gray area. It's not. Of course we're not saints. But the fact is that the point is that we're willing to grow on spiritual lines. I want more. I remember being like maybe 90 days sober. There's a guy of 40 years, and I just loved this guy when he talked. He was just an amazing guy. And I walked out of the meeting. I felt like I had goosebumps. It was just the best meeting I've ever been to in my life. And the guy looked at me and he goes, "How you doing?" I go, "Dude, that's unbelievable." He goes, "Kid," back when I was a kid, "Kid," he goes, "Keep coming back. It gets better." And I didn't really kind of grasp that really in the moment. I have understood what that means today. If I stop coming back, I'll never experience the gifts of Alcoholics Anonymous or Cocaine Anonymous and these 12 steps. If I keep coming back and I practice these things in my life, the minimum freedom that I get is from addiction. The maximum is from my unmanageability today.
Okay, so for this next chapter, we're going to go back and forth a little bit here, David, because I want you to supply some of this information as we're going through it, where these things are.
Okay.
So our description of the alcoholic, where do we find that, David?
So you're going to find that in the doctor's opinion and the first 3 chapters of our big book.
The chapter to the agnostic, where do we find that?
That would be chapter 4, sir.
We agnostics. And our personal adventures before and after, where do we find those?
So we'll find that as we work all the steps here. I mean, it's not black and white necessarily, but before I got sober or after I got sober, sometimes they say that. Or when I was running my life on my own free will, or as I'm running my life on God's will today, before and after.
So our description of the alcoholic, the chapter to the agnostic, and our personal adventures before and after made clear 3 pertinent ideas. Abby, any words from that paragraph?
Yes, I do have agnostic, which is a person who does not deny the possible existence of God, but holds that his existence or the origin of the universe are not known and cannot be known.
Lovely. So, in our personal event, go ahead, David.
Well, I was going to say Bill wrote in the original manuscript at the very end of that thing, says our description of alcoholic, the chapter to agnostic, and our personal adventures before and after after make clear 3 pertinent ideas, he said, have been designed to sell you 3 pertinent ideas. That's what he
Sell
said,
you.
to sell you, right? He's a salesperson, right?
Yeah.
Sell you 3 pertinent ideas. That's not so far-fetched, but I understand why he changed the language. I get that. 3 pertinent ideas. That's what they said here.
Which are
Mhm.
A, that we were alcoholic and could not manage our own lives. Sounds like step 1.
Step 1. So if I
Go ahead.
change the we to you and personalize it, that you are an alcoholic, I am an alcoholic, and that I cannot, instead of could, I cannot manage my own life. That's what I want to be clear on that. So I understand. See, that's why I don't ever give up on new people that relapse, because I understand the first step. I just totally understand. I mean, there's chronic relapsers. I get that and all that. And I don't want to get into all that. But the thing is, if we study this book, I understand the first step.
And Rob put that original manuscript little chunk there in the chat. If you look at it, that A, so our version of A, you know, that made it into the first edition is that we were alcoholic and could not manage our own lives. But what did Bill say? That you are alcoholic and implicitly you cannot manage your own life. Right? You see why they changed the language a little bit, right? This was this from Harry Tebow? I might get this wrong. Who said, change your pronouns a little. Let's sort of reel them in a little bit, be a little less aggressive. Right? B, that probably no human power could have relieved our alcoholism.
So the word probably, Joe Hawk gives this description that could be a drunk trap, because you're talking about, so am I going to be the exception to this rule? That's, the alcoholic's always looking to be a little different than everybody else, right? No, I'm not. Either I need power, I desperately need power, or I don't desperately need power. There's no gray area here. That probably no human power can relieve me of my alcoholism. And alcoholism isn't about drinking. Again, it's about my unmanageability. The first step is outlined in 2 parts. My alcoholism.
So we have a correction from our friend and historian Howard. That was Dr. Howard, not Dr. Tebow, that helped Bill with the pronouns soften a little bit from the you to the we. Thank you, sir. C, that God could and would if he were sought. So, original version, let's just read them again. And this is really an important shift in the way that Bill thought about this. And the reason why, so let me read it and then editorialize a little bit. In the original manuscript, after the A, B, and C, that you are alcoholic and cannot manage your own life, that probably no human power can relieve your alcoholism, that God can and will. He went on to say, if you are not convinced on these vital issues, you have to reread the book to this point or else throw it away. Think about the message, right? And so Dr. Howard was like, all right, let's simmer down a little bit here, right? And there's a little bit of, listen, this is life and death. There's no question. And I've heard speakers that I revere say, and I'm guilty of saying the same things. Well, I got to tell them the truth and the whole truth. And if they can't handle it, too bad. Okay, maybe. Also, sometimes we get more flies with honey than with vinegar, right? It's not, it might be my responsibility to tell a newcomer the whole truth, but I don't need to be obnoxious and aggressive and try to chase them away. It doesn't help them, and it doesn't help me. So this was reshaped through that we were alcoholic and could not manage our own lives, really step 1. That probably no human power could have relieved our alcoholism, really step 1. And that God could and would if he were sought, really step 2, right? Which is where we are at this point. We got 60 plus a doctor's opinion, 70 pages on one. And what was it? 53 of those 70 were really step 1. It's about 17-ish step 2. But this massive of the first 164 plus the doctor's opinion, right? 70 of 174 pages. We're just getting to step 3. Ultimate must have the foundation in 1. Must have the foundation in 1. Must be convinced that on my own power, I'm not going to get better. And what a blessing if I can come to that conclusion, because then I don't have so much trouble with two. Then I can start, I can wrap my head around coming to believe, cracking the door in willingness, start to believe in a power greater than myself. If I don't get that powerlessness in one, why am I going to be interested in discussion and power in two? I'm just not.
So when I take B and C here together, that probably no human power could relieve me of my alcoholism, and C, the guy couldn't would if he were sought. So this is where I have started a relationship of power, and I got to name it, and now I get to act it if it's as though it's real. This is a new dimension for me, right? This is a new dimension. It's step two, step one, step two, step two. And if I change some of the writing in C, it says if I wanted to do that, it said that God can and will, or couldn't what it says, but I said can and will, and then put a period at the end of it. He can and will. And then if he were sought. So a lot of times you hear I can't, he can. So I think I will seek him. I don't say I will let him. I think I will seek him. That's a caveat that I changed it to. So so I just like to say he can. I think I will seek him.
Being convinced, italics, we were at step 3, which is that we decided to turn our will and our life over to God as we understood him. Just what do we mean by that? And just what do we do? Abby? Anything? No. Okay. So being convinced of what? Anybody? How about being convinced of those 3 pertinent ideas? I'm not going to read them again, but we're culminating. This is the work that we need to do, these 12 steps. And Bill said, don't be freaked out that it looks like a lot of work. And then he rounds it out by saying, everything that we have been talking to you about to this point, the description of the alcoholic, what it's like to be an agnostic, what we were like before, what we are like now, is supposed to culminate our experience at this point in the book in these 3 ideas, the A, B, and C. Right? And so if I'm convinced of that, then maybe I'm at step 3, right? The onset of step 3 is that I decide to turn my will and my life. And again, guys, what are the words that Bill wrote here? What is 3? Made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. Joe and Charlie has great stories and anecdotes and analogies for all this. He talks about how he and his wife made a decision to drive, from Texas out to California to see their relatives. But they never made a plan. They never got in a car. They never made it to California. How many times have I in my life made a decision to, anybody starting a diet tomorrow, right? You know how many times I said I'm starting a diet tomorrow? Made a lot of decisions. And then what happened the next day? Did I eat carrots and celery and drink water? No, I ate Oreos on the couch, right? A lot of decisions to start a diet. Not so good about doing it. In 3 is me making a decision to turn my will and my life, or my thinking and my actions, over to the care of God, God's stewardship, God's control, God's direction, as I understood him, past tense. This is my conception of God to this point. Remember, right before this, guys, we were just in the chapter, We Agnostics, where Bill kind of urged us to say, don't try to have this well thought out and fully formed idea of God. Take the little bit of not well defined, just willing to believe in something bigger, and just go with that, right? As I grow in recovery, as my spiritual fitness improves, as my spiritual suit of armor gets polished and strengthened, my concept of God, my higher power, will probably be stronger. It will change for sure, right? But at this point, I'm just making this decision to turn my will and my life over to the care of God as I understand Him. And here's the sneak preview. How do I back up this decision? How do I fulfill this decision, this commitment that I'm making to turn things over to God? Spoiler for this / sneak preview is that I fulfill this decision, this commitment by continuing the work. I really get into action. I make my 4-step inventory. I share it in 5. I get into 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. And then I carry this message to alcoholics for the rest of my living days. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, so it's a power-packed paragraph, actually. So being convinced. So am I convinced of what David pointed out, the ABCs? Because if I'm up to this point, this is my conclusion. Because here's the convinced part for me. Convinced mean being moved by the evidence. The evidence at this point is that once I put a drink in my body, I'm going to break out in craving. And once I stop, I don't have the power to stay stopped. And I am in desperate need of having a spiritual awakening. So what am I going to do here? I'm going to make a decision here to turn my will, my thinking, and my actions, as David pointed out, as Joe and Charlie so famously illustrates for us, over to the care of God. God of my no understanding. No understanding. Because if I understand God, He's not a powerful enough God for me. He's my no understanding. And just what do we mean by that? Well, what we mean by that is we're going to get to pages 60 through 63. And just what do we do? From this point on, after that period, to page 164, that's what we do.
Continuing on 60, bottom paragraph. The first requirement is that we be convinced that any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. On that basis, we are almost always in collision with something or somebody, even though our motives are good. Careful. Most people try to live by self-propulsion. Each person is like an actor who wants to run the whole show, is forever trying to arrange the lights, the ballet, the scenery, and the rest of the players in his own way. If his arrangements would only stay put, if only people would do as he wished, the show would be great. Everybody, including himself, would be pleased. Life would be wonderful. In trying to make these arrangements, our actor may sometimes be quite virtuous. He may be kind, considerate, patient, generous, even modest and self-sacrificing. On the other hand, he may be mean, egotistical, selfish, and dishonest. But as with most humans, he's more likely to have varied traits. What do you got, Ab?
I've got 2. I've got propulsion, which is something that propels a driving power. So most people try to live by self-driving power. And then have virtuous, which is righteous, moral excellency. In trying to make these arrangements, our actor may sometimes be quite righteous.
So just real quick, I want to give the floor to David. I just want to say one thing about most people try to live by self-propulsion. I just always, if you go back to 27, my favorite page, I'll just read it to you guys. Ideas, emotions, and attitudes which were once the guiding forces, self-propulsion of the lives of these men are suddenly cast to one side and a completely new set of concessions and motives begin to dominate them. That's the promise of the 12th step. But I'm just taking an opportunity to illustrate when we're talking about what is self-propulsion. It's that old thinking, feeling, and attitudes that are just driving me through life, right? Me trying to call the ball. Go ahead, David.
So, because our friend Howard is here, I'll point out to you right away that the first 3 words, the first requirement is a must. We know that there's, now that we've counted up, he's counted it. I haven't really counted it, but I have them all marked in my book. There's 139 musts in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous thus far. So the first requirement is a must that we be convinced. Again, he's using the word convinced in 2 paragraphs. Convinced of the evidence, moved by the evidence that I am powerless over alcohol and that my life is unmanageable. These are part of my daily activities in untreated alcoholism. That any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. I know that today. On that basis, we're almost always in collision with something or somebody. Remember the bedevilments. Ask yourself, are you having problems with personal relationship? Ask myself, am I having problems with personal relationship? Am I feeling useless? Can I be of real help to other people? Am I full of fear? And then it says most people. So, okay, let's go with that. Most people, certainly alcoholics, try to live by self-propulsion. Each person, and let's take this and put it in third person. Let's take this and break this down. And I'll use my name here. Each person is like an actor. David is like an actor who wants to run the whole show, is forever trying to arrange the lights in the ballet. Well, here's the comical part about that. Actors do not run the show. Directors, producers run the show, but I'm the actor who wants to run the whole show. So David trying to run the whole show is forever trying to arrange the lights, the ballet, the scenery, and the rest of the players. David on his own way. If David's arrangement would stay put, if only people would do as David wished, the show would be great. Everybody, including David himself, would be pleased. Life would be wonderful. In trying to make these arrangements, David may sometimes be quite virtuous. David may be kind, considerate, patient, generous, even modest and self-sacrificing. On the other hand, David may be mean, egotistical, selfish, dishonest. But as with most humans, David is more likely to have varied traits. Ask yourself that question. That's what I try to do. And when I'm being selfish, and I take my own inventory in 10, a lot of times I'll take my guys back to pages 60 through 63, and we will read this word for word. And when I cause them troubles, when I'm running the whole show, this brings me to tears sometimes as we graduate through these pages here, because I don't want to be that human being any longer. I loathe myself when I got here. I loathe who I turned out to be. I don't want to be that person anymore.
And I don't want to go there because we'll get there next week. But this concept of self-propulsion is so important in this part of the chapter. On the top of first paragraph in 62, where it gets into driven by 100 forms. This is another reference to self-propulsion, moving forward, being cast forward, right, by all the yucky stuff that's inside of us, from the bottom of my scalp to just above the soles of my feet, right? And so this first requirement, and forgive me if David already said this, I'll just underscore it again. First requirement of what? Well, how about first requirement of the third step? In order to turn my will and my life over to the care of God, this is a requirement. It's a must that I have to be convinced that any life run in self-will can hardly be a success. So this is kind of, I'm softening my language, no good reason. This is a direct call back to step one. Remember, after the dash that we're always hammering this on, my greatest problem, the powerlessness is a problem, right? Whether I'm powerless over alcohol or other drugs, or other, processes or substances, whatever I'm powerless over, and I'm powerless over many things, significant problem. That's what allows me to be a membership of one or more fellowships. But my real problem is my unmanageability, my spirituality, right? That's what qualifies me for the solution. And so if I don't get and agree that I am powerless and my life is unmanageable, I don't think I'm going to be convinced that any life run in self-will it's hardly be a success, because by the way, that's the only life I ever knew. So I'm being confronted with my own inadequacy here again. Right? And more than being confronted by it, I got to be convinced of this fact. That's tough to swallow. So on that basis, we're almost always in collision with something or somebody. Again, if you're like me, this was very much my existence. All right. I irritated and annoyed and pissed off everybody. because I just didn't care about anybody. And I just went through life like a bull in a china shop, destroying things in my wake. Sometimes unintentionally, most of the time intentionally, because I liked to be a jerk and I liked to be a bully. I was just sort of a bad actor and I liked the chaos. Right? And then again, most people try to live by self-propulsion. Okay? Not just, say, alcoholics and addicts, but most people on this planet. Not all. We all know those good, healthy people that have this strong faith, right? That are driven by something greater, something higher, the higher power they got through whatever other means. And then there's this great analogy. And I remember being early in recovery and we were reading this part of the book. I don't know, probably a few weeks in. And I commented and I said, I don't know, this is really hard for me because I feel like this is how I go through life and it really works for me to something to this. And I remember people were just looking at me grinning like, this kid is a maniac. Like he's just absolutely out of his mind that he thinks this is an appropriate way to go through life. But I honestly kind of defended me behaving this way because, again, this is the only way I knew it exists. To me, the alcoholic life was the only normal one. This seemed normal to me, that this is how I went through life and that it was okay. I didn't have to have been put in charge. I could declare myself in charge. I'm not sure there was anything that makes more sense to me as an unrecovered alcoholic or addict is that if only people would do as he wished, let me put this in the first person. If only people would do as I wish, the show would be great. Everybody, including me, would be pleased. This was my essential approach to interactions with other human beings. Because, yeah, okay, that's a good idea, but let's talk about my idea. Let's talk about how I want to do this. You're going to be better off. Just trust me. I know what's best for me. I know what's best for you. The egocentricity of that is embarrassing as I talk about it. But this was me. I was so fully formed in this self-centeredness, just trying to drive these things. Right? And I also love here how it paints a couple of different people. So I used to, for a long time, I sponsored this lesbian couple, still friends of mine, just not sponsor them anymore. And I loved because they were these two different people. It says, he may be kind, considerate, patient, generous, even modest and self-sacrificing. That was one of the people, and David and Abby know who I'm talking about, right? Because they're friends of ours out here. On the other hand, he may be mean, egotistical, selfish, and dishonest. And when we'd study together as a group, I'd be like, there they are. There's the two of them, the either and the or. We got the passive aggressive and we got the aggressive aggressive, right? It doesn't matter how we express ourselves. It's what are the motives, right? The motives might be good. We might be able to rationalize them. We might be able to defend them. But ultimately, those motives are all self-serving, right? It's all about what I want. David, you want to circle back on that?
Yeah, just a little bit. So what I'm going to be looking at here, so page 60 through 62, so I'll bring this up again next week just to refresh everyone's memory, is the source or the underlying condition of the bedevilments. This is the whole page here is about self-will. That's what it's all about. The whole thing is I read it in third person for myself. It's like that is how I will ask my sponsees to read this too. And as we go through this page, we're going to find out how this is where the next paragraph is where I start with my sponsees. I start at the bottom of page 60, but I make them read this thing word by word and we break it all down because we're going to find words like self-pitying here, blame, responsibility, irresponsibility. I'm sorry. We're going to find out that we cause confusion, all these things in my life. And the bottom paragraph on page 61 in his first full paragraph, it talks about this is a good measuring stick. And I know we didn't get there, but am I a producer of confusion rather than harmony? I have to ask myself that before I open my stupid mouth sometimes. So this is such a great book, guys. Love studying this book with you people. Really, really love it. Thank you very much.
All right, perfect place to stop for the night. We'll just stop a couple minutes before the hour.